potential long meeting ahead. I want to thank everybody for changing any Monday plans they may have had to continue our conversation. Well, we know where we rank with Jerry. To continue our conversation regarding the comp plan, transportation master plan, double header we tried to do last week. So this evening, we're going to go work on the transportation master plan. We have the planning board. Mark, do you have all your planning board members here?
Planning commission is over here.
Planning commission. I know.
3 months here.
I'll get it. We have all but Jerry Valdez, Mayor Pro Tem, here for the council. So we'll go ahead and get started. We're going to operate in the same fashion as we did with the comp plan, in so much as if you've got some questions and stuff that don't get answered, that we don't get to, please just make notes of those and get those to Kathleen, and they'll get incorporated in a document that will circulate back to us. And we're really going to have a conversation tonight about, again, we're going to stay at the policy level with this, and you guys can help make sure that we stay there. We're not going to talk about implementations and that type of thing. That all comes later. But having good conversation is always valuable for us, but we want to make sure we get this covered, and it's a pretty substantial report. And I know we haven't really had the same intros into this as we've had with the comp plan, so we need a little bit of intro time on this too. So I think I'm gonna hand it off to Mark and let him get it started.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Well, I wanted to kind of share a few thoughts here as we kind of dive into this next document. I think it's obvious to all of us that we're doing something that we haven't done before in this particular city, and that's actually put together a transportation master plan as kind of a separate document. So I think, from my view, this is kind of a fascinating conversation in our city, because we're going to talk about some things that we've never collectively, as a community, and certainly at the policy level, really never kind of talked through and decided. Things that, in my own personal career, we've done multiple times and updated multiple times, and so I kind of take for granted a couple of key things here. So in my view here, I just want to offer a couple of suggestions. First of all, we need to think in terms of 20 years, the long term. And so what we see today certainly is important, and it informs us here, perhaps in the implementation piece of this thing. That's later. We're going to talk about policy at transportation level. Implementation is in September. So I know it'll be hard to kind of separate the two, but it's real important that we stay at the policy level, recognizing implementations later. So for example, it's obvious that no city can afford all things in transportation. So implementation kind of comes down to finances. What is it you can financially afford? And so what are the priorities based on your limited resources? And so that conversation again is in September. Two things, in my opinion, that are key for us in our transportation master plan that we haven't talked about before. One is the cross-section of our streets. What is the intent we hope to do at a policy level when it comes to the cross-section of a street? What are the modes of transportation that we want to accommodate, and why? So at a policy level, we need to kind of talk through that. The other one that is absolutely key for us that we do not have is this level of service standard. I'm going to try my best to give you a kind of concise picture, in my view, of what the policy issue is for us when it comes to level of service. When a community actually establishes a level of service, it does a couple of things. And if you remember, it's a grading system, A through F. And so all it is, it's a measure of time. Time that you spend, say, for example, at an intersection and wait for the cycle of a traffic signal to move through. So in the case of A, no delay. In the case of F, a lot of delay. Now, is there a measure somehow beyond F? Well, there certainly is delay beyond F, but it's a national measuring system. And so why that's important is at two levels. So you take, for example, pick the level of service D. D is a very typical standard across this country for all cities when they decide what is the appropriate level of service for themselves. And so in that particular instance, it's saying to a city that when we go in and actually take on a corridor and we're gonna rebuild the infrastructure, we're gonna allow a certain amount of delay at an intersection. So all the improvements then are kind of focused around that level of service D. No worse than that, no greater delay. So if you were to somehow move up the scale, you're actually gonna say to the community, we wanna put more improvements, less delay. The other thing that's real important about the level of service is for the development community. So when you have a development proposal that comes to a particular area and you ask them to do a traffic study, you're asking them to project the amount of traffic they're gonna have through the network at specific intersections. And so a very typical policy is, again, using level of service D, is if the amount of delay exceeds D, then that developer has to fix that problem before we will allow them to proceed through the rest of the process or grant approval. So those two things, in very simple terms, are what level of service is about. And so I'm hoping through this conversation this evening, we talk really about both the intent of cross sections of streets and then level of service. And I hope Aaron's our traffic engineer, I hope I did that justice. Because
Yes, boss.
people like Aaron spend their entire career in the level of service, and I don't want to go into that depth. So for us, the challenge is trying to understand what does that mean by moving through the grade? And why is D perhaps most appropriate for us in particular? All right.
Will you also move back how the Transportation Mobility Board engaged in this before?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I think we have a real interesting advantage to us in this community. Okay, again, we don't have a transportation master plan, but the advantage that we have, one that we must recognize, is that when we adopt a transportation master plan, we're in essence handing off to the Transportation Mobility Board, working through the detail, to come back to the City Council, to make recommendations about modes, recommendations on infrastructure investment. Why? What are the priorities? To kind of flesh out some of that detail and to have that public process through that board and then bring it back to the City Council for us to, as the council at a policy level, to make those final decisions. But honestly, in my view, I foresee us probably changing the transportation master plan perhaps more often than we will the comp plan. I think that's why, in my opinion, it's important to have two separate documents. Complement each other, they have to. But the TMP policies over time, I bet you're gonna flesh out more detail as time goes on. In fact, I am confident. Okay, thank you.
All right, I'm gonna outline the agenda, and then I'm gonna have Keith Reister get us started, and then I think you all remember Keith Borsheim with HDR that's been working with us on the team for the Transportation Master Plan. So we're gonna do that overview, and then there are a couple of foundational items or sort of building blocks where we're gonna try and center our conversation. They don't explicitly pull out policies, similar to the process that we went through with the comprehensive plan. But those are really the objectives that came out of your work on mission and goals, the level of service that our city manager just talked about, the street types, and then we'll start drilling down into those policies. And those will reflect modes and trends, and so we'll kind of take those step by step. And then we'll kind of remind you of, what's coming next. So with that, I'm gonna just turn it over to Keith to get us started, and then it was confusing. Keith and Kathleen.
Yeah, we got all of it, it's like a triple K up here, right here,
Alliteration covered.
Yeah, K is like a rocket team behind us. So,
Knockouts.
thanks everybody for being here tonight. I told the mayor that my main responsibility is because I'm not going to the game, I do not want to be stuck in post-game traffic. So I don't want to live the worst of both worlds. So, this is as Mark said, this is a very unique situation. Frankly, Mark and I have really never worked in communities that are starting a transportation master plan from scratch. I'm frankly not aware of any other communities that are doing this. unless they grew from like 8 people to 1,000. It's just not the case. And literally from a professional standpoint, I would say we are multiple decades behind. There's really the only way. Most of our peer cities in Colorado started this process in the mid-80s to put the history and time frame on this. So what we need to, I wanted to lay some groundwork about the framing of the Transportation Master Plan and why, Mark said it in overview, why this is important. And I want to provide some context to that. The first thing I want to say is that we're in a position where we are not growing. People-wise we are, but our street network is not growing like a spider going out like you have in a growing city elsewhere in the Front Range. The network that we have in place is, most of it's 60 years old. I know that from a maintenance perspective as well. But when you think about that, all the things that are out there today, like the right-of-way that we own, the size of the right-of-way, a lot of those decisions were made decades ago. And so everything that we do as an organization, as professionals, starts with what do we have and what is the context that we are operating in. For example, if we wanted to go out and expand everything, we're going to talk about $500 million tonight. I would need more than $500 million just to buy the right-of-way if you wanted to expand everything. That's just the reality of our business today. So we need to take into effect that we've got 60 years under us, and a lot of things have changed in 60 years, okay? 25 years ago, there wasn't a light rail station in this town, in either place. So a lot of things have changed pretty dramatically over that time. One of the things that at a policy level we need to think about from a transportation perspective and why this discussion is important, it's not necessarily level of service. That's really important. But what does level of service eventually impact? It's a quality of life issue. It's an economic development issue. If you have bad infrastructure, you do not get jobs. And if you have bad quality of life and bad infrastructure, nobody wants to live in your town and work in those jobs. It's a fact of life. I worked in those cities too. We're not in that position here. The other things that are important to us are safety. Every decision we make is based on safety. Our team spent a fair amount of time on a specific nuance of safety in the last 48 hours for a particular intersection. The other part is connectivity. It's really important that our network connects not just in one mode or another. It's great to, for example, have multimodal sections in one part of town, but if it doesn't connect to anything else, it's all useless. It's just like if you have a street that turns into a cul-de-sac, you can't move traffic through there. I know planners and developers love cul-de-sacs the last 50 years. For those of us in our business, not so much. So you have to think about connectivity. The other thing that's really important for us is that we play a critical role in regional transportation, as does everyone around us. And so when we look at the things that are in the transportation plan, regional context and regional connectivity and operations is important as well. We all live and breathe this on Santa Fe. It's a perfect example of that. So what that means to, from a regional perspective, the things that we talked about on a regional level with DRCOG and our other partners around here are things like congestion management, air quality management, operational management for, say, traffic signals, which manages both of those, congestion management and air quality. We also talk about regional multi-modes. For example, we see this every day. The parking lot's full at Mineral Station at 6:45 a.m. How else are you going to get there except in a car? That's a connectivity, that's a multimodal issue, that's a quality of life, and an economic development issue. Those are all examples of that. The other part of it that's important is that regional context is critical if we are going to successfully bring outside dollars into this community to build projects. As we've talked about recently, Santa Fe and Mineral is $90 million. Littleton cannot pay for that. In fact, hopefully the $15 million we're going to spend in the short term, we're getting basically 80% of that from outside of here. But we can't do those things, whether it's roads, bikes, PEDs, air quality, safety, congestion management, traffic signal modernization, fiber to all our signals. We can't do that stuff unless it's in our plan, because it doesn't check one of the boxes that you're gonna go out to say, hey, we don't have a history here. Council's heard this from me recently. We've been able to leverage, we're gonna spend about $6 million to leverage basically $38 million in the next 4 years. In the last 20, we brought in about $500,000 in grants. One of our challenges now, though, is we got to start budgeting for local match, which we've never done before. And that's one of the things that comes out of your transportation plan, the ability to plan for that, to frame things around that. So the last thing I want to end with before I kick it back over to Kathleen and kind of start the process of going through, and Mark touched on level of service. I operated in a community that in the 1980s adopted level of service C. Now when you get into level of service, this is one of those things in our business that we talk about, is maybe 30 years ago we probably should have picked a different scale, because as soon as we talk about A, B, and C through F grades, people start thinking about 3rd grade. Honest God. And so when you think of a D, you're failing, okay? I mean, that's just what people do. You know, it's human nature, okay? I got kids in elementary school, I get it. So what that translates to, though, is I can tell you right now, in this city here, 98% of your network operates at A every day, all the time. When we're talking about level of service, we're talking about basically a 90-minute window in the morning and a 90-minute window in the afternoon. And a few spasms around schools, midday. But that's the way I put them. And that's really what we're talking about. If you think of all of your local streets, they're all operating at A right now at this moment. Unless the police or fire department's there slowing things down. So that's what it is. The other part is, from a level of service standpoint, I was in a community that adopted level of service C. How does that impact your development community? In that particular community, their impact fees for transportation are at least 15 times as high as this community. Now there's an upside to that. It gives us money to address capacity issues as you grow through the community, intersection expansion, volume, all those things. But there's that balance you want to walk with costs, economic development, and all of those kind of things. So that's how those things play out. So as we go into this thing, what's important, at least from my perspective, is that we need to have a regional context that's reflective of Littleton, but also one that is aspirational, looking forward about where we want to be as a community from a transportation perspective 5, 10, 15, 25 years from now. And there's one thing, and I made this statement earlier today, and I've made it before. You cannot build your way out of congestion. I'm just going to be very clear about that. And if we wanted to build our way out of congestion in this city, first of all, we'd have to put up some gates on either end. We'd have to start there, some toll bridges. And then we'd probably need another, I don't know, at least $750 million on top of the $500 million we're talking about. So that's why some of these other things like congestion management, operational improvements, safety, mode alternatives are important as we move forward. So I'm gonna flip it over to one of the other Ks here to my right. So you kind of take the baton and run with it.
Yeah. Do you want to run through, we had a couple of initial slides just to kind of walk through the same process as we did with the comprehensive plan. So if you want to walk us through those, then as we're doing that, then we'll land kind of page 37 is where we'll ground you in those objectives, so.
Yep. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you everybody for coming here an extra night. I know that wasn't necessarily the plan, but I'm happy to be here, and I hope to, answer any questions, concerns with the draft plan and incorporate those questions and concerns into the next version. So, quick overview. Some of these slides are repeats from what we saw in the comprehensive plan presentation last week. So I'm just going to kind of breeze through this, and hopefully then we can dig into the meat here. So first of all, future city elements of the draft plan. You all have seen the existing city and mission and goals. But we do want to go over those again tonight. But all the stuff in kind of the teal color here, or aqua, or whatever color that is new. So a lot to dig through here, and hopefully we can make our way through it. Core plan elements. We followed the same structure as was in the comprehensive plan. One big difference though is there's more detail. Deeper dive in transportation. This is a transportation master plan, so there's a lot more detail within this plan. One thing Keith mentioned, potential partners. So that's gonna be part of the implementation section to come, and where we're gonna come up with that local match and see what partners we can work with to deliver projects. Okay, similar again to the comprehensive plan, capital investments, programs and initiatives, regulations and standards, all of this stuff. Perfectly appropriate for a transportation plan, and we've laid out several options in this draft. One thing back on that. I'm gonna go this way. Capital investments. You may notice there's a placeholder in here. That's part of implementation. Again, we're trying to stay high level for now, and we have a long list of capital investments. Keith mentioned $500 million. That's about right where we're at. Little bit of a sneak peek in this draft in the critical corridor section of what some of those might be, but again, that's to come. Okay, so again, learning from the vision phase, we wanted to incorporate that input that we heard throughout that vision 2040 process. So from input to vision, or from input and vision, one of the comments we heard, east to west connection is an issue for bikes, peds, and cars. There are significant barriers. I think everybody here could agree with that. Leads directly to a core value, one of, the most important from a transportation perspective, safety, pedestrian, cyclist, and driver safety. And then one of the guiding principles from that was connected. Littleton will be an increasingly connected and accessible place. Leads directly to goals, policies, and actions. So again, a sneak peek, the goal being the connected goal that we've talked about before. The policy, consider installing in all ages and abilities bicycle facility for every new bike project. So that's a policy we can talk through later. The action, which by the way was not in this draft, but sneak peek, work with the South Platte Working Group to construct additional bike and ped crossings of Santa Fe to the river. Okay, so again, the philosophy of this plan is a complete network of streets. So what we went through as a big lift as part of this effort was to create a new context-sensitive street class system. So we'll go through those street classifications in a little bit. But a key element here is that level of service. And we've gone ahead and developed a level of service measure for bikes, peds, transit, and of course, we're using the long-established level of service for networks. Then you have overlays on top of this. So auto and freight overlay, bike and ped overlay, transit overlay. So again, we can go through that. Yes?
So with peds, are we also including wheelchairs?
Yes, yes,
I just,
definitely. Wheelchairs or other mobility devices.
okay,
Thank you. Finally, I call it a sneak peek because what's on the critical corridors, in the critical corridors section is kind of a summary of all the projects, programs, initiatives that we want to develop and institute for these critical corridors. Could be a corridor plan, could be actual projects, all of that. These are going to be kind of the cheat sheets. Someone asks, what's the city going to do about Santa Fe? We can use these and say, here is the list of measures that we're going to take to address issues on Santa Fe or the other critical corridors. So again, next steps, prioritized projects to achieve the vision of complete networks. That is this room's job to help us develop the policy, how we're going to prioritize those projects. We're going to put something in front of you for your reaction, and hopefully we can work it out as a group how we want to do that. And then of course an implementation plan and incorporate all the comments that we get here and from the public.
Is this next steps meeting next year?
Well, that's next steps for this plan, so that's within the next couple of months before adoption.
Gotcha.
Okay, so that sets the table. if we want to open our books, I think, Keith, did you call them hymns earlier? Open our hymn book? We can go through the objectives. That's on page 37. Yes.
Just a question. So, in talking with Kathleen, we've been told that this is aspirational.
Yes.
And talking now with Mark and Keith, we're looking at practicality. And my question is about how do you mesh them? I was just, one of the things you said about all ages, all abilities for the bikes. Well, that's awesome and that's aspirational, but it's not practical.
Right.
How should we be looking at combining aspiration with practicality to make this a better practice?
Sure.
Keith, I'll take one from Keith. I'll be very direct about this. What happens in a situation is, the way it practically hits the ground is, if we say one of our goals is to improve connectivity for all modes. What that means is when we go to do a project, let's say we're going to do a paving improvement project on Prince, from here to Ridge. So what that does is, as we look at the context of that roadway, what are we trying to accomplish? We're trying to accomplish enhanced movement of vehicles. Sometimes enhanced means slowing them down. And all these council members can tell you that's the case because they send me lots of emails about that from constituents. Okay, so that's definitely can sometimes be the case. So you're moving the traffic through, and then the question becomes is, within the existing right-of-way, where do we go from there? Is there an ability for us to add additional bike lanes? Maybe not. Maybe it's sharrows in the flow lane. What do we do about pedestrian access? A perfect example of this is, last year we completed an infrastructure assessment and there are 4,000 non-compliant ADA locations in our infrastructure. So what that means is when we touch a street at a certain level, we have to address those mobility and connectivity concerns. And I'll tell you why that's important. I don't want the federal government, Department of Justice, coming and telling all of us how to spend our infrastructure money. Okay? It's a simple way to put it. So what that means is that as we look at all of these things, the practicality comes is we start looking at a project, we look at the context of it, we look at what we have in right-of-way, we look at how we do the links and the connections, the nodes where the intersections are, and how do we fit those parts and pieces together. And the solution that we pick on Prince is not going to be the same solution that probably goes in on Littleton Boulevard or Broadway or a neighborhood street. That's part of the professional work of taking the vision of the plan and executing it on the ground. We would never go out and do a project and say, this is the template, drop it on the street, start tearing down houses, whatever. The crabapple people would come after me first because I'd be cutting down crabapple trees. So, those are the kind of things where the vision meets the practicality. Okay, that's the reality of it. We say this, we say, okay, we want connectivity, we want modes. This is how we execute that on the ground when we look at the context of it. What money do we have to execute too? That's always a component. What can we do for safety? Those are all the things that we look at. That's how vision works its way down to practical implementation.
If I may just build on that too, Keith. Sorry. So this particular policy point says, consider installing an all ages and abilities bicycle facility for every new bicycle project. Consider is an important word. That does not say install an all ages and abilities bicycle facility. So, pulling us back up out of that project level to the policy level, what does this city want to see for its bicycle facilities? Do we want to have that as a policy that city staff, as council, the Transportation Mobility Board considers all ages and abilities when they're thinking about building these bicycle facilities?
Carol. And you use the word consider there, that makes sense. On page 31, it's a much more directive word. It's allocate, that sounds like you will do it, services and facilities so that all people have transportation options that are best suited for their needs and lifestyle. That seems like a very different thing, that you will allocate the services for all people.
That would be, yes, that statement from my perspective is critical because we must comply with the ADA Act.
Is that why that's there?
Sure, it's one of the modes. I mean, that's a very simple way to put this.
But it's an unreachable goal.
It's just like I said, it may be an unreachable goal, but we got a lot of those in the city. The goal here, the goal here is when we start deploying our transportation system, we wanna look at how we improve flow, connectivity, safety, and access to the system. Regardless of whether you can see, whether you can not move on 2 feet. However, if you access it by car, those are all part of the system.
And what then happens when we inevitably fail to provide facilities for all people?
Well,
Do we get sued? Do we, what happens? Because,
ADA, the Department of Justice will come and solve that problem for us.
oh,
Legally would be the way to put that, but in the simple context is, yeah, I mean, we can't. We do need to look at the needs of everyone in the community when we're trying to make infrastructure decisions. So the answer is all need to be considered in the decision-making process.
so the word there should be consider rather than allocate. Consider allocation of.
That's fine. At the end of the day, we're gonna review all modes whenever we do a transportation project. Whatever the word says in here, we're still gonna do that. That's a fact of life.
Okay, so the words don't really matter. Okay. Cool. Karina?
I had the same comment on all, so thank you for bringing that up. If you are telling us it's a requirement to put the word all, then it's a requirement for the reasons you stated, but I also had a concern with all. We have it both in the mission statement and as Carol pointed out in this inclusive. And then just to follow up to Robin's comment in something we've talked about, even the comprehensive plan, we don't wanna put something out there that we can't do. Why put it out there? You're absolutely right to say, then we have, the rubber hits the road and what is truly practical, and we'll make decisions along the way. But I don't wanna put something out there, because when we put something out there, we're putting out a promise and a commitment. And I just want to at least have some opportunity or chance to truly achieve it. So that's a little bit of a balance. That doesn't just apply to the transportation master plan, but also the comprehensive plan and a similar feedback we provided. So again here, if this word is a requirement to address some of those risks, that's one thing. But I think to set it, if it's for other reasons, or it's just a word we chose, let's see if there's a better way to articulate.
We have to remember, this is a goal, it's not a promise or a requirement, it's a goal. That's when you set goals.
Well, it says
it's-
mission
It's the
statement.
mission. It's in the mission statement as
Yeah,
well.
as a
As
goal. See the big green circles?
And yet it's an unattainable goal.
That's a good goal, you should strive.
I don't think it's a good goal to have a goal you can't reach.
So
Now,
who
Keith
do-
says we're gonna have
Who
it,
would you like to leave out in the community?
well,
You
what
don't
I,
want to try to do transportation for everyone, who would you like to leave out?
well, no, that isn't a reasonable way to approach this, because it says all, so that means you can't leave out anyone. And if you do, then you have to keep addressing that person's needs.
You're suggesting take the word all out, so who would you take out?
And it doesn't mean you're taking out people, it means you're taking out, you have to serve everyone for their best suited needs and lifestyle. So let's say I want a leisurely lifestyle. I don't wanna have to lift a finger. Come on, address my needs.
Okay, let's go ahead. I think you guys are getting a taste for that. Yeah. Well, I will tell you, I think that parsing a single word is not the way we're gonna plow through this. And if there's more than a few folks that have, just a second, Peggy, have an issue with the single word, then that might be something that can be sent to the team, and if it can be reworked. Everybody in here has a different connotation of what a goal is. We can sit here and argue that all night long. So I do think though with what Keith is saying in terms of, because we are working on, I believe, mobility,
is this issue of ADA, and it's something we haven't talked about, it's something we haven't addressed. It is something that we haven't put a lot of money into. And we are behind the 8 ball on this, and the federal government is not lightening up because the community of disabled are not lightening up. And ironically, my phone just popped, an email just popped up. It's a gentleman in our community who has ADA issues, and he says, I hope you can help me before I have to sue you. And he's got very real issues with access on Prince. And Keith's right, if we don't address those, if we have a meeting in this room and someone is unable to hear the meeting, we have violated ADA. We have to provide them some sort of hearing aid or some sort of amplifier in order to be able to hear that meeting. So it's really, really, really important. And we may be kind of rough getting where we need to get in this with it, but I think if we kind of keep it in mind, and then you guys can kind of help wordsmith through that. Peggy, I'll let you speak, and then we need to move on.
So I already mentioned the wheelchair issue, and this next idea is somewhat connected with that, and that is the sort of go-kart kind of thing that people can ride in. I'm thinking myself, well, not a go-kart, a tricycle, an adult tricycle. I failed bicycling because of my bifocals. I'd shift the head and then I would lose orientation, and I said life is too short to break a hip. So, but a tricycle and there are adult tricycles that I think we should accommodate. And maybe more adults then will get exercise that way and get where they want to go more easily. So consider that one, please.
They're all the rage in Florida, in the retirement community.
Sure.
Honestly, my father has one.
Okay.
So, that's a preview, don't do that. Okay, so back to the objectives, shall we? Page 37. So I don't necessarily want to go through each and every objective, but I do understand that there's potential here to, and I want to reiterate, this is a draft set of objectives. We have not received a ton of comments specific to this list, but there is still a potential to adjust some of these objectives. We have a set of objectives that are focused on quality of life, community goals, general mobility goals, active transportation goals, auto, freight, and transit. So, I'm not sure if we've hit the nail on the head here, so I definitely welcome comment on the list of objectives, because these go right into the next step of prioritizing projects. This is how we're going to score our projects, how they achieve these objectives, which tie back to our goals. So definitely very important. One thing I want to point out is the scoring is not going to be a one-to-one, check the box, does it meet this objective? We've begun to score these on a scale, and we've begun to weight some of these objectives, mostly based on the number of people they would impact. So acknowledge that as of today, people use cars mostly to get around Littleton. So we will impact more people through auto-oriented projects. So, should we be weighting auto-oriented projects that meet these auto-oriented objectives higher? Perhaps. So again, put that to the group. Any specific objective comments are welcome. If there are some that we think we need to discuss as a group.
This might be an opportunity for us to kind of massage this a bit on our own and get you some additional information or some of those thoughts too. Yeah, Bruce.
All right, I'll several observations. On number 2, provide spaces people can enjoy within the public right of way. I'm not quite sure what that means. Are we talking landscaping? Are we talking art?
Yes, generally, all of those things,
Okay.
mainly because our streets are our greatest public gathering places.
10, provide transparency about the transportation plan. I'm not sure transparency is something you provide, it's something that is part and parcel of the plan. Just
Yeah.
throw.
And just to give some additional context, that is a major goal that was part of the vision.
Okay.
That idea of good governance, transparency, and so some of that language is being blended back in, but we can definitely take a look at that.
May I interrupt for just one quick second from a process perspective? What worked really well last time is that we went through each objective, so if we all have a comment from 2, then we can all talk about 2 at that point in time, as opposed to going through Bruce's list, Karina's list. Maybe it's just us 2, but I actually think the way we did it last time, where we went objective by objective, and then that way we all talk about one particular one if we had a comment on it, I think actually worked.
Okay,
Are you guys open?
I'm ready.
Deb's call.
I mean, it went quick.
Here we go, number 1, everybody ready?
I think you made a decision.
How about we try and tackle them as a group? Quality of life ones, and maybe that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll read those 4 quality of life objectives, and then we'll discuss them as a group. Achieve high resident satisfaction rates with transportation services, provide spaces that people can enjoy within the public right of way, provide people with a sense of personal safety while traveling, provide transportation infrastructure that meets local business needs. Okay. The community.
I
have one question
Yes, great.
on provide people with a sense of personal safety while traveling. I kind of read that as traveling in a car, or is the intent walking, bicycling?
It's all modes. This
Okay.
one is non.
Just, I guess the word traveling to me feels like you're on a trip somewhere.
I think, yeah, tourists.
Yeah, right.
But if that's an appropriate word, it's fine, but I just want to make sure that encompasses all modes.
Okay.
Every time you move, it's a trip.
Travel down to your mailbox.
Even if you just walk to the fridge.
Mark, I just want to kind of make an observation here about when we talk about the quality of life, based on my experience, when we talk about the design or an objective, more appropriately, for a transportation system that accommodates personal safety. Of all the issues in my experience of over 30 years in this business, this is perhaps one that has risen the highest in my view, especially when you're talking about the design of pedestrian systems and you want to connect things, access to schools, access to transit, safe design. It has to be perceived by those in that mode that it is safe to be in that instance. Otherwise, your investment is not realized. So I encourage us, that particular point for quality of life and safety is key.
So is there a need? I'm gonna ask this question to table it for consideration. Perhaps as we go through some of this, at some point we have to highlight those key, like, non-negotiable. If we do nothing else, this we will do. I mean, I don't know when and how, but.
So we can all probably agree that we've heard from lots of people that they don't feel safe crossing the street on, they don't feel safe riding a bike on certain streets, they don't feel safe in a car at certain intersections, so yeah, that's important.
Okay, there's 7 community ones. They are: provide transportation facilities that are well integrated with land use and character, minimize transportation-related air quality degradation, minimize transportation-related water quality degradation, minimize transportation-related noise impacts, provide a flexible transportation work plan, provide transparency about the transportation plan, provide a transportation system that the city can afford to maintain. Sherry.
Looks like number 6, 7, 8 could also go under healthy. Just a comment, rather than just categorized as sustainable. suggestion.
About the same, and when you go back and look at the. Wait, yeah, you would think it could.
It's related to your health, so.
I know, but
You know, it makes sense.
Very much so.
Karina?
I just wanted some further definition of number 9 and 10. Provide a flexible transportation work plan. Tell me a little bit more what that is, and provide transparency about the transportation plan. What would that look like?
Okay, so one at a time, flexible transportation work plan. And this should probably be worded a little bit more clearly for the public particularly, but it's our plan to implement projects, programs, initiatives here after this plan is established. It should be flexible. Things are gonna change. We're gonna have new trip making patterns, new technologies, all those things. As those things come online, we should have the flexibility built in to adjust our work plan and what projects we're doing. And then the second one was about transparency. That's just being community driven. So continued outreach, continued, communication with the larger community.
Yeah, and I think
actually encourage the removal of the word transparency. It's just a hollow word and everybody uses it. If it is community outreach, if it is continuing to keep the public updated and informed, use those words.
Yeah.
Okay. Cause I think
that says more to the community than transparency.
and the other piece for us is making sure that the process of how you prioritize is simplified and clear, right? So it feels very intuitive. If we had dollars, we know how the community kind of knows or has an indication of how you might spend those. Okay, mobility has 5 and they span 2 pages.
We got one more.
I was just gonna say, it's a small one, but I think the number 11, you could put a bullet under prosperous as well. Just, and if you're affording it and able to maintain it, it checks that box.
Okay. Mobility, provide a reliable transportation system, achieve a balanced mode share, provide high quality transportation people can afford, provide human scale infrastructure, provide travelers with relevant, timely information.
Number 14 to me is cross purposes. People want 3X, they can afford 1X. Just because you want it doesn't trump economic reality. To me, this is just a fighting phrase that's fighting each other here. It has very little meaning to me.
What part of the phrase is so that high quality versus affordability, is that what's fighting?
No, people can afford, well, they might, they might say they can afford 1X, but it costs 3X. They stomp their feet and say, well, we want. Throughout here, it also said, there's a lot of words, it's phrases that start provide, provide, provide. And I keep coming back to who pays, who pays, who pays.
That's the job of a public works director and city engineer every single day. People call and stamp their feet and they want something done, and we only have so much money and so much time and deliverables. That's the job of what we do every day.
So are you saying take the word affordability out?
People can't afford to just say at a reasonable price, something along, and then that's negotiable.
Well, a reasonable price could be something we can't afford, we can't do it.
That's correct. Just take it all out then.
Affordability, I think, is key.
I'm not gonna fight it, it just seems to be across purposes.
Sure. I just wonder if we could combine number 12 and number 14 and just throw high quality in with reliable. Make this conversation move.
So just a little background about why it's in there. So it's from the user's perspective.
Yeah.
So not everybody in this community can afford to take the train every day. Not everybody in this community can afford to own a car. So it is about what people can afford in the community and providing services that meet their needs. So that's why it's in there. Not to say that it can't be reworded here.
I don't think that's what it says. I
That's
get
how I
that's
read
what
it,
you
yeah.
want it to say, but
Okay.
that needs reworded to what your intent is, cause it doesn't really say that.
Okay.
Cause it says to me what the general fund can afford.
Right.
And that's not what you just said.
It's supposed to be from the user's perspective.
Okay.
So be clarified.
Provide travel options the citizens can afford or something like that.
Use the word user.
Okay, they'll write it.
Let me give a word, so value, right, so it's not about affordability. If the value of the service is great, I'm willing to pay a higher price. If the service is not great, I don't wanna pay that price, so I think it's about value than it is about affordability, so play around with value. Okay, so here are my comments on mobility. It's the value proposition,
I'm
that's
just
what we
gonna
use.
throw that out there.
What's that?
I'm just gonna throw that out there.
I'm just throwing it out there, that's what we use in
My
marketing.
comment.
Okay. 15, provide human scale infrastructure as opposed to
Mouse.
Human scale refers to how we have often overbuilt our cities. Santa Fe could grow to a roadway that is uncomfortable for a human to actually be on. Outside of
Sure is, yeah, I was gonna say. That is a perfect example of a non-human scale street.
In a lot of places it is, most places throughout the city. And so it is providing places where humans can feel comfortable, who are not protected by 3,000 pounds of steel.
Let's say it that way.
Karina, yeah, maybe.
number 16, provide travelers with relevant, timely information. So again, what is that, what are you envisioning that to be?
That would be maps, available maps online for various services. It could be real-time traffic
Stay
information.
current on innovative technologies and.
That's correct, we partner with CDOT on stuff like that, it's like your overhead sign,
Sometimes
when there's
it's
a traffic
overhead
ahead.
signs.
When there's an accident ahead, that's real time information.
Maybe.
We get off road.
Well,
It'd be good to add some of that innovation, like, again, thinking 20 years out. Right now, it seems like it's just that billboard that says traffic ahead or accident ahead, but it's intended to be so much more than that. So it'd be nice to add a little bit more of that innovation or technology that may develop over time.
Bruce.
And again, just you got the bullet down here, I was just gonna offer up that the reliable transportation system and high quality system people can afford are both inclusive as well as the ones you've got ticked off.
Kyle.
I was gonna say, I thought it was revealing that the only objective that reaches all of the goals is that high balance of transportation.
I'm sorry, I missed that, what did you say?
The only objective of all of these objectives that strikes at each goal is provide a balanced mode share. So to keep that in mind, that is important because it hits every single goal, not focus on just one or the other, but find a balance.
Before we move on, I just want to address this issue of the word afford, the word value. There has to be a context in here regarding the fact that if any of this is going to happen, it's going to be out of the pockets and purses of the community. There is no other source for us to do a lot of this. I mean, yeah, we can get some big grants to do some big $90 million projects, but paving and sidewalks and adding a lot of these amenities in neighborhoods, it will come from the citizens' pockets. And we just did some polling and the citizens said, there's not a transportation problem and we're not gonna help you fix it if there was one. This is futile if we don't get a way to be able to afford to do this. And that it comes from one place. That needs to be clear in here, whether it's the value proposition, the affordability, but it needs to be clear that we cannot execute these goals, these policies, these anythings if we don't have the money to do it. And we don't have the money to do it. So without it getting, in their face with that stuff, it needs to be clear, because we just can't keep dancing around this at all. And I think that it doesn't mean we're gonna get $100 million out of your pockets next week, but I think we have to prepare the community for what we need to fix and what we need to do. So somehow, as you're using those words, getting that intent across, I think would be for the future very beneficial.
So it sounds like 11 and 14 really need to be looked at.
Okay, then on to active.
Provide a well-connected bicycling network, provide a comfortable bicycling network, provide a safe biking environment, achieve a silver bicycle-friendly community designation, provide high-quality end-of-trip bicycle facilities, provide a well-connected pedestrian network, provide a comfortable walking experience, provide a safe walking environment, provide excellent pedestrian and bike access to schools, provide high-quality access to recreational facilities, and provide healthy transportation choices.
Lost the screen.
What is a silver bicycle-friendly community designation?
That's a ranking that's nationwide and is in there, and the reason it's in there is because it encapsulates a lot of what makes a bicycle-friendly community. And it's a really easy, identifiable objective that
Is
we
it like
strive for.
gold, silver, bronze, or like silver sneakers?
No, it's gold.
Good
Level
question of
of
service.
they do rank.
Okay, so it's not age dependent, it's just a ranking of the,
Yes.
okay. That's what I thought it was.
Bruce and then Sherry, did you? Okay, Bruce and Sherry and then Robin.
I'm just gonna offer up that there's a lot of nuance in here, and I'm not sure it's doing you a lot of favors or us a lot of favors. Well-connected versus comfortable versus safe versus high quality versus excellent versus comfortable and safe versus high quality. I mean, either cut down on the number of objectives or combine a few of them or do some sort of representation of what the nuance difference between comfortable versus excellent is, for example.
Sure.
It seems like there's just too much stuff going on in there.
Sherry.
And I had the same comment, wondering, can we just combine some of these or maybe there's a reason why everything's called out one by one, but it seems to be a pattern on the previous page, so if we could just kind of look at some of those and say, can we condense this a little bit? Because there are an awful lot of objectives here.
Robin?
Ditto.
Okay, got a consensus. And where you can combine bike and ped, I think that would be good too. Peggy?
So I don't see a need to have number 26, provide high quality access to recreational facilities.
You get
I
to
mean,
it, there's no access.
want to provide access to all kinds of things, which is, I think, called out in other things. And in 23, I don't know quite what a comfortable walking experience is unless it's not getting muddy.
We're gonna provide shoes.
Yeah.
Shoes.
And
downhill
then that's what you're wearing as opposed to the surface or whatever.
Right. A comfortable walking experience is how you feel when you walk down the street, which is probably different than I feel when I walk down the street.
And
So-
it's safe?
Whether it's safe, whether it's you're not gonna get mugged, whether you're gonna fall down, whether the street is safe.
Whether there's shade.
All those things are part of a comfortable walking experience.
I don't hear all those implied necessarily in that.
Okay, you pick another word. Shade is a perfect example. If you look at all the old pictures of downtown, there's no trees. As soon as your trees go away and you're downtown, nobody goes down there anymore.
So you might wanna say provide, experience that makes you wanna do it every day or something like that.
Okay.
Maybe you individualize that a little bit more, so individual comfortable experience or something like that. Was there another hand up? Okay, moving on. Oh,
I
Never mind, Karina.
So my reaction to this was I was looking for an efficient way to get from A to B. Is that what well-connected is intended to be?
Yes.
This goes beyond efficient too.
I'm guessing, and 17.
Okay.
Okay.
Auto, provide a well-connected automotive network, provide a safe automobile, or provide for safe automobile travel, provide a resilient and responsive traffic operations system.
Robin.
So like in the other ones, you wanted to provide a comfortable, why wouldn't we wanna provide a comfortable here?
That is something up for debate. I think that's one that, when I think of comfortable walking, to build on Keith's point, I think of level sidewalks that I'm not tripping on. I think of shade. I think of those kinds of things. I don't necessarily think of those things in an auto network.
There's a lot of potholes and manholes.
And that's a maintenance
That's
issue.
in a different plan.
That is a, and we're not.
Plan, I can tell you that.
Well, why isn't level sidewalks a maintenance issue?
It is too. They're all, once we build anything, we still gotta take care of it. And that's a place that we've failed before on a plan here too. So that's also, a derivative plan of this is your maintenance plan as well.
Carol. The word resilient kind of fits in with that word transparent. It's used a lot, but it really doesn't, there isn't a lot of agreement on that. Could we perhaps get that out of there?
I would,
Oh, boy.
I would be
Does he not
resiliently
require
resistant, I would be resiliently resistant to that, and the reason is because I can say this, the terminology certainly in our business is one in which having operated in an emergency, if you have a river, for example, that bifurcates your city and all your bridges are underwater and you don't have one that you can get over, that's resilient infrastructure. And it also resilient.
So it actually needs something
right.
in your context.
That's right. Resilient infrastructure is not only during an emergency, but how quickly you bounce back.
It's like a lot of use and it's still useful.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Are auto support items intended to be covered here, like fueling, emergency services, access, parking, right? Should there be objectives around those elements that are oriented in the right of way?
There certainly could be, particularly parking. We do not get into parking a lot in this plan, mostly because we envision that taking place in the downtown mobility plan. We know it's an issue here, so could be added. Again, up to the group, I would say. The fueling, not necessarily one that would typically be found in a transportation master plan.
Toward alternative fuels, that has to be part of the network.
You're meaning like electric vehicles and that kind of thing?
Right.
That would probably fit under the objective of minimizing transportation related air quality degradation. Is where I would see policies or programs that would incentivize those kinds of things.
So does it have to be said somewhere? Because again, we kind of inferred and dug for it, because when I start thinking about that, it's a good point. When I start thinking about that, you start seeing it more in those public-private partnerships, so the airports now support, so they're public sector needs to help support the infrastructure for that kind of travel.
Right. Yes, so it should be said somewhere.
Okay.
It should generally be said in the general mobility chapter that talks about emerging technologies and those kinds of things. One of the things the city should consider is electrifying its fleet as a test bed for electrification.
Maybe we go with something like, it's one of the objectives is our transportation is supportive of innovative transportation technologies as they evolve.
Okay, yeah. Mark and I just decided that we're going to put the issue of parking in the parking lot.
Oh.
Discussion at a later date. That was a team bad, Robin.
So would you be that generic in the sense of just using the word innovative instead of more specific stuff like what the conversation was here?
Sure, because if I'm looking forward to traffic over the next 2 decades, we're gonna wrestle with electrification, data sharing, autonomous vehicles, autonomous trucks and freight. Those are all things that are still at the cusp of development, so really, those are all gonna transform. The stuff we're doing today may transform dramatically in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. So I think leaving it more broad-based is, I think would be supportive of adaptability and flexibility.
I'm thinking because the new studies are showing that if you look at the lifespan of an electric car, the whole lifespan from the time it's created to the time that, it's put to bed, it actually has the same pollution level as a diesel. And this is new information coming out, so I didn't want to put something specific where new information would come out and say, hey, that's not so good anymore. I like what you said.
I mean, there's also, and another example of that is there's data that says automated vehicles will cause more congestion.
Yes, exactly.
I actually think more road rage, but that's separate issue.
Thank you.
Not just automated vehicles, but Ubers and Lyfts.
Yeah.
The only thing, it seems kind of funny that we just have 3 under auto, but I almost feel like provide safe automobile travel. I almost, almost feel like that actually needs to be pulled out a little bit more. I mean, we're all responsible for our own safe automobile travel in the way that we drive. Well, what is the city actually responsible for in a master plan on safe automobile travel? Is it safe ingress and egress? Is it visibility at curb, where you can see around things? I mean, all of that stuff adds up to safe, and it just, I don't know if we wanna make 300, no, we don't wanna make 300 objectives. But I wonder if there's a way to kind of make that put a little bit more money in that word. It's like a 5-cent word, make it $1.
Yeah, we can certainly do that as an objective.
No potholes deeper than 4 feet.
Yeah, we don't wanna compete with Sheridan. Karina?
We got neighbors that take care of that.
Yeah,
not us.
neighbors got neighbors
that.
So.
Karina?
I come back to this word efficient that I commented on earlier, but in this case for auto, it's about, and we talked about it earlier, it's about building capacity through operational efficiencies, not building capacity by structurally building it. So do we need a specific objective to talk about operational efficiency? Yes? That would be wise.
I like that idea.
Okay.
And
I would like to make that recommendation then.
you'll notice that a lot of the next time we meet, you'll notice that a lot of the improvements are operational and safety improvements, so that's where we're focused.
Okay, next.
Alright, transit, provide a well-connected transit network, provide comfortable transit service, provide high-quality demand response services for at-need populations.
So explain to me what role we have in transit.
So
We've gotten nowhere with RTD for 20 years, so.
that's true, but an example of how this manifests itself on the street is if we don't plan our infrastructure to accommodate transit, then there will be no transit. The other part of this is, the other thing too is, we're the only city I know of other than Denver that has 2 light rail stations, just saying. So, part of us then becomes
No parking.
That's true, but still got a station though. Most other cities would take that in a second. So, but what that also relates to is last mile, first mile connectivity and those kind of things. So that's all part of that network. That's how we support it.
Maybe then the verbiage is, instead of providing a well-connected transit network, providing.
How about connections to the transit network? The same thing, and I think.
Or working in partnership I mean, because we don't provide any of that. We can't provide a bus route, we can't provide a,
We do provide transit. We do provide transit.
oh, I'm talking about RTD, not the omnibus.
Well, is response for need populations.
Is that omnibus?
That's some of it. I mean, that's on-demand service tied to other things. Let's put it this way. I mean, we're, as a community, other than omnibus, we're just basically relying on RTD and we're assisting in them planning. Other communities here in the Front Range have made the decision to make localized or regional investments to boost that service level. And we're not just talking like a Boulder. That's very common. And we'll see that the example of this was Centennial deciding to have subsidies for last mile, first mile for Uber and Lyft. That's supporting transit. So those are the kind of alternatives out there that we think about when we talk about connecting and supporting transit. Not just taking the lead on it.
Would supporting better pedestrian and bicycle traffic to those stations be part of that?
So is cars to our, because basically our light rail system is park and ride. So all of that's part of it.
I just think that the verbiage you have in here on transit, I mean, that's the kind of thing, we do a transportation master plan, we've got really strong verbiage in here about how we're ready to work with and meet our way and what we need to do with RTD to get some of the things we would like to have RTD. It doesn't say that. We could take this, if we get it tweaked to the right place, then this is something that we can sit down with RTD and say, listen, we just ratified our transportation master plan, and guess what? You're on page blah, blah, blah. This is what we're committing to. This is what we want. This is what we want in our community for transit. How are you gonna help us? And I just think it needs to be more powerful. It needs to be what we can take there and bring back what we ask for.
I support that. The other part of this goes back to the comp plan is when we talk about something, say like BRT on Broadway,
Exactly.
that relates back to our own choices related to land use and investment. So it's kind of at both edges of the sword when we bring that out.
Okay.
Mayor, if I
Yes.
one other piece to kind of emphasize here too is if you think about it in terms of the next 20 years, I agree with everything that was said here about transit. One of the things too, I would like to have us have a deeper involvement with RTD about routes that connect a lot of this infrastructure. We haven't done that historically in this city. And I've been in another city where they decided they're gonna jump in, and actually hired staff to kind of interact with their other transit, or regional transit agency, just for that very specific purpose.
So does this objective, provide a well-connected transit network, give us essentially the authority to do that? Is that what would fall
That
under?
would need to be, we don't provide that. We would work in partnership. We would do it. An example of that just happened on County Line Road. We have 4 hotels. Who works at hotels? These are the people that take transit. How many bus stops do we have over there? 1. And it's heading east. What do they, and I don't even know how it happened. But they just put another one in heading east. So now we have 2 bus stops there. But that's where that should have been there before those hotels were done. And we've got, there's huge apartment communities over there. There's a lot of other, there's a church over there now. There's the Falls Event Center. All of that stuff gets people around a lot better.
Good examples.
So how do we make objectives that talk about transit like that?
And then the final, freight, provide a reliable freight network, provide a well-connected freight network, provide a safe freight network.
And by freight, do you mean those freight trains?
They're part of it, but it's every truck, it's every store in the town.
Right, okay, so if we can,
Clarify that.
I'm not sure we need it to even infer the railroad.
Right.
Okay.
I had the same thing, if you could use the word truck, I was reading this, I'm thinking.
Actually, all I can tell you is this, as your public works director, I answer a lot of phone calls and emails specifically related to the freight of this community.
From the
Related to the train specifically.
That it was more before they sunk the
I wasn't around then for sure, but it would be depressing if that hadn't been depressed, I can tell you that.
But I think you have to delineate that this is not the freight trains, because that people will see that and they think we will have any authority over that, or that we can move these trains when they sit there all the time.
Yes. I think we still need to refer to it, because if, you know, for example, if the freight trains move their lines, that would change the dynamic of how we build Mineral in Santa Fe. So to me, you know, I mean, it's just, they're all part of it, because
What are you drinking?
gotta try. So, look, you gotta ask or they'll never listen to start with, so.
I see the word freight, I don't think freight trains, I think
Is the problem, the key word is always provide here, when we really don't provide a lot of these things. It seems like it would be, you know, actively engage in partnerships to do these things or whatever. A provide seems to be the
So-
word that's kind of tripping us up.
I'll just offer one thing. So these are objectives for our transportation network. Strategies are to work with those partners, which we get into in the policy and strategy discussion.
Right.
So I think it should be our objective that our citizens are provided a well-connected transit network, a well-connected freight network. How we get there is the next step.
The freight, the other part of this freight, for me also is a significant economic development issue. If you don't have an ability to move freight in and out of your community and multi-modes of freight, you won't have manufacturing or those types of jobs here either.
I still wonder if, oh, sorry.
Down on the end first.
Oh, actually, you had your hand up earlier. Just, maybe we should add freight as a definition to the table and talk about freight in the context of this plan means trains and trucks.
There you go. Correct.
I was just wondering if it captures, as I mentioned before, the emergency vehicles, the construction vehicles, you know, we have automobiles and then we have freight, but what captures those other, even maintenance access for drainage?
I forgot to come back to that. I think that should be included as an objective here as part of our model. You know, provide an auto network that allows us to be responsive to incidents and, you know, emergencies.
When South Metro reviews this, I think thought about them.
They'll provide comments in November.
That's slightly different.
Was there a hand over here, Peggy?
Yeah. There's also the pedestrian piece of this. And for the jillion years I taught at the college, a lot of that I watched people in front. And it wasn't always safe because of ice, crossing the street or on sidewalks, whatever. So I'm not quite sure.
I do think that comes back to that conversation we had about 23, comfortable, make sure it's not icy and it's well maintained, or safe, 24. I think both of those talk to that pedestrian mode.
I think it's covered under active, and then we can drill down with more of the processes of it.
As long as we have that adequately covered.
Okay.
I had some really exciting times. Because you think somebody's walk's going to be shoveled, and the next thing you know, there's 5 feet of snow in front. Because this dude is in Florida.
Karina?
Just to go back to number 20, the silver bicycle friendly, can we just add that as a definition? I don't know if it's already there.
Yes, please.
That last one, yeah. So we started this evening's conversation around the idea of a complete network, and talked quite a bit about level of service. I don't know if you want to add any additional context, Keith or Keith, but I think that it's worth making sure, because it is foundational to the implementation plan that you'll see, to make sure that if there are any questions, that we're covering those in a group format.
So for example, the question of, I think I read in here that we're going to level D, or that's what we're setting?
That's the level of service that we have talked about as a standard. Right now, we have no adopted standard. And, you know, level of service D is, you know, Mark described it very well. It's delay time at basically peak hour.
So that's the minimum level at certain intersections. Minimum level anywhere in the city, since you, I mean, most of it's at A.
That's right.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I think what percentage did you note for,
So if you take the
All the local
street
streets.
miles we have, at least 90% of it's operating at A right now.
right, it's just to
Just one
add that
Yeah, yeah.
clarity for folks, yeah.
Minimum level.
And I would just maybe recommend, sorry, that we table that until the auto freight policy discussion, because it is one of the policies that we're gonna go through.
Yeah. And I think level of service, we've tried to help define that for other modes as well. And so that becomes sort of an overarching approach for you, so we're on to street types.
Okay, so page 40, new street types for the city. The city has long used a standard classification system of arterials and collectors, which have historically been extremely car-focused and lacking in context. Those two definitions of collectors and arterials don't capture where the street is, what the land use is around that street, what you want the street to look like, what kinds of modes you want on that street. So we've attempted to kind of rethink that whole thing and come up with a new classification system and apply that across the city. So I just want to walk through the classifications real quick and describe what we're thinking and maybe give some examples of where these streets exist in the city today.
And then can I just provide some additional context? I think one of the important pieces of work in the comprehensive plan is that we've really tried to help define community character relative to our land use. And so one of the challenges then when you start thinking about transportation is how do you transfer that character so that it feels the same as the land use side? And so that's where there's a great limitation in terms of those standard definitions and an opportunity for us to really, for these plans to really speak to each other and seem a lot clearer in terms of both approach and context. For practitioners, they would call it context-sensitive solutions, but that doesn't get thrown around as much anymore. So.
And one other thing here is this sets the table for the next step for the city is to recreate design standards for all of these different street types, including different mode treatments and that kind of, is this more of a truck street or more of a bike street? So help develop those standards with these in mind. So at the top left, local streets, no real change from what was in the old classification. These are your neighborhood streets, where you live, your houses are along these. Doesn't necessarily have to be limited to residential. We can have local streets that have commercial or other uses along them, but they're slow speed, low volume. Next one down is neighborhood connector. So this is what we typically would call a collector street in the past, which connotates that it collects traffic and then distributes it to arterials. But what we want to talk about with neighborhood connectors is we want to actually connect neighborhoods and people that live in those neighborhoods to the businesses and other uses in those neighborhoods, schools, etc. So again, these are slow speed, low volume streets, but typically are carrying a bit more traffic than other streets. Next, it would be a suburban connector. So this is a larger street, again, connecting suburban neighborhoods to each other. A good example of a suburban connector is Mineral. Nice street that has a median on it. It does have bicycle facilities on it today, connects neighborhoods. Sometimes it goes through commercial areas, mostly residential though, adjacent land use. A little bit faster speed, typically these are gonna be your 4-lane arterial. See, there I went. I almost said arterial.
We're so practiced in this business, so.
We don't have those anymore. I've gotten rid of those.
Your 4-lane streets that would have turn lanes and those kinds of things, and kind of car focused in general, but can provide for other modes. Different kind of character on the next page. mixed use in downtown. So this is, if you look at the picture, that's Sycamore Street. And you'll notice that the buildings are a little taller, they front on the sidewalk. There's little to no setback between the building and the sidewalk. Sidewalks are wider, detached from the roadway. So, you know, different character here, which affects the street design. Maybe there's gonna be more people walking around because the land use is slightly denser. Or maybe there's going to be more people on bikes or using transit. So all of that affects the street design. These are still slow speed, low volume streets. Mixed use downtown Main Street, really we just have Alamo and Main Street today that are classified with a mixed use in downtown Main Street classification. That may change in the future. These are future street types that maybe Littleton Boulevard transitions to a mixed use downtown Main Street at some point. Where the buildings come up to the street, up to the sidewalk. There's street trees and on-street parking provided on these streets.
Or it could be mixed use downtown, the item before. Littleton Boulevard could be that.
And then finally, commercial corridors. So these are called big streets. You know, they carry a lot of people in cars, on transit, sometimes on bikes, although not as frequently. You actually see a lot of pedestrian activity on commercial corridors because those are where those businesses are.
Like Broadway.
People get to those businesses.
Broadway.
Broadway has a lot of pedestrian activity. Bellevue is a commercial corridor. Santa Fe is a commercial corridor. It's about the land use that exists along that street. Typically faster speeds, higher traffic volume. That's that kind of street.
Carol, back to local street. The picture there, I wonder if this is intentional or perhaps an accident, is showing 3 sidewalk obstructions.
That is intentional.
It is? Why?
It's a typical condition in Littleton.
It's against city code though.
It is against city code, but there's nothing about the design of the street that prevents it. That would have to be enforced by overworked police. Whereas we could
Well,
design.
actually, that would be enforced by code enforcement,
Or code enforcement.
and they do enforce that.
Or we could design the street so that doesn't happen. And provide wider sidewalks that don't get obstructed. Or we could put a tree lawn.
Here's my concern, by having it in this document, I think it says this is okay.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's okay to do this, see? It's right here.
Yeah,
I would ask that we consider
change that picture out.
finding, if you could have that vehicle.
A legal picture.
Yeah, but without the steps across the sidewalk, without the pull-out on the side, and without the electrical connection going across the sidewalk.
Well, maybe where you have examples of fixing issues, you can have this picture and how to solve that problem, be more clear about it.
Kyle?
So on the little tables on the left side of all these, we have, the purpose and the lanes. One thing I would like to see is sidewalk and bicycle lanes called out there, what type of sidewalk. So in locals, there may not be paved sidewalks, or there may be a 3-foot, when you get to mixed use downtown, you wanna say, okay, it's gonna be a 6-foot to 10-foot sidewalk with maybe separated with trees in between, kind of call that out a little bit since this is very auto focused here. But we've been talking about how pedestrian focused it might be, so if we put that in there and say, these are generally the items you see with sidewalks in this type of street, bike lanes.
The other thing I think would be good to include on this is what type of parking. So some of them, no parking, some of them, different types of parking. Robin?
So I was looking at your commercial corridor, and it's a little more than halfway down, where it talks about commercial corridors in Littleton have typically been focused on automobile travel. Just make sure you're there.
Yeah.
So it says, but should transition to include And thinking about what Public Works had said earlier about, well, they consider everything, but they can't do everything. Wouldn't it make more sense to be, but should consider transitioning to instead of you should transition to, but you should consider to, because you were saying you're gonna consider all them, but you can't do all them.
That's an interesting contextual thing because the Bellevue plan that's already been adopted says should. I'm just, so.
Isn't that just a vision?
It's still an adopted plan.
Is that a commercial corridor?
Not a question. At the end of the day, yes, the reality is what you build what you have, you figure it out. You try and create safe environments for everybody that are engaging and bring people out. Commercial corridor, you want people there or the businesses don't thrive. So whether, however they're gonna get there is a key part of that, so.
I'm thinking Santa Fe, you'd be suicidal right now to take a bike or walk in that area. I can see that being what you're saying, that's the one street where maybe you don't promote and go all out because people are gonna drive that corridor.
Unless you include like some plan in that corridor.
Or I was just going with what you had said earlier, and it seemed to contradict what you had said earlier. That's where that comment came from.
At the end of the day, like we talked about earlier, it's, at the end of we still have to select practical solutions no matter what context we're in. And that's part of the professional implementation. That's the kind of thing we'll be working with the Transportation and Mobility Board as we look at how we travel through corridors and look at projects.
Karina?
Our new character map actually, so I'm using 51 as a reference point, page 51, which is the map. So our character map for a comprehensive plan extended this downtown neighborhood, I forgot what we called it.
Transition.
The transition one? Yeah. To areas east of Prince and along Littleton Boulevard. But here we have not yet identified or aligned that potentially we should have some mixed-use downtown connectors in those same neighborhoods. So given that this is a future state map, I think it should link, that link needs to be made, and I think it's a missed opportunity.
Okay. Other questions? Okay.
All right. Okay, so those are those foundational items, so I would suggest that we dig in now on the policy level relative to each of those sections, which would take us to page 56 for auto.
56?
Yes, 5-6.
And if you need to take a quick break, go ahead. We're gonna keep plowing through. Get up and get some food if you like. Carol?
I would like to go back for a moment to page 42, 43 before we move on. The term sacrifice bothers me. And I've heard, Mark, I would like to have your take on this again to see if I got it right. I've heard you say many times that we don't need to sacrifice vehicle lanes in many cases in order to allow space for bikes or pets. And in each of these sections, there is a sacrifice, which I find kind of unpalatable because it has that zero sum feel that somebody's gonna have to give up something for somebody else to get something.
Sorry, Carol, where specifically on those
Page 42, 43.
The bottom of each box, right?
Got it.
Yeah, so there's a sacrifice, and each one of them is the same paragraph. It says sacrificing space or mobility for the private automobile. So we're gonna take away from the automobile. And longer delays, so that's the opposite of what we're trying to do with the level of service. Reduction of space for on-street parking. So this is talking about taking away from automobiles, which is our primary thing right now, and reallocating that space. But what I've heard you say is that won't be necessary.
Could you guys describe a little bit of the sections here that you're talking about here when you say sacrifice this? And I'll try to remember our conversation, Carol.
Okay, so just so that everyone's in the same section of the report, we're now on page 42, which is the conversation about overlays.
Let me try this again, since Mark doesn't recall it. Do we want a policy, so this is going to roll into policy, where we take away or we add to our existing problem, which is moving traffic through by slowing speeds and longer delays? And do we, in order to give space for other modes of transportation?
I'll take this one. You know, maybe we use a term like, as opposed to sacrifice, trade-off. Because right now,
that would be,
we are making trade-offs on Santa Fe related to pedestrian access to our highest profile asset, which is the river corridor. So we are making trade-offs in both directions currently. So maybe trade-offs is better than sacrifices, because that implies decision-making and flexibility versus sacrifice.
versus somebody's gonna get hurt.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. Robin?
Yeah, just looking at this in a little more detail, you know, where it talks about, you know, with I'm just gonna use the bicycles in the sense of going to the schools, because I live right by a school. So I watch in my neighborhood where there are lots of cars lined up to drop off kids, but, you know, I see a bicycle every month or two, very, very little. And to me, when you say now I have to sacrifice the space for the cars there, for the bikes, it seems like that should be more based on each community where that is for how it's actually used, so you're not harming one in your attempt to help another.
We actually are doing that every day. We work with for example, we work with every district, every school in the district, and that's why we have programs like Safe Routes to Schools. One of the things that's happened in our world is 20 years ago, 80% of the kids came to school on foot, bicycle, or bus. Today, typically 85% come by parent-operated vehicle.
Oh my God.
So one of the significant ways to reduce the spasm that everybody in the neighborhood calls us about, and you, and the council members, is to increase safety for alternative modes, so more kids walk and engage on bikes. Maybe they do a walking school bus. So that actually enhances the ability to pass traffic through there while simultaneously providing alternatives. And that's what we work on with every single school, actually. So it's a way to actually enhance vehicle mobility while also increasing access to the school in more than one method. Because
Just adding context to what Keith is saying to this. This is our 20-year plan. So there's trends that come and go, but in terms of the peds and the bikes in these areas, there's rising trends that we might be able to accommodate over the next 20 years. Who knows where things will be. So just keeping that flexibility, that opportunity, that this is something that we don't have to do it, but it's part of the arsenal of things that we can use if we need to, that we're being that thoughtful. And so then if somebody is gonna go in and build a school, which we know LPS is going to do, then there's a way now that we can address mobility around that school for variety. So just longer term. Go ahead.
If I may, just kind of, perhaps this is what you were referencing, Carol, was some of the conversation we were having about the implementation of a lot of these policies, where when we talk about sacrifice, one of the things you have to evaluate is whether or not you are willing to make that level of investment, say bike lanes. Is that really the highest priority for that particular corridor, or can you do that someplace else?
Exactly.
And one of the examples we've talked about internally is Littleton Boulevard. Do you want to put bike lanes on Littleton Boulevard, or do you want to look to Powers as perhaps a corridor that goes east and west as being safer, perhaps meeting some of the objectives that we've delineated here? So it's not that you're just going to blanket, like kind of sacrificing all car lanes for bike lanes. There is this conscious decision that you need to evaluate corridor by corridor, network by network, to try to optimize that opportunity. Is that kind of what you were remembering?
Exactly.
Robin, review, good?
Yes, I like evaluate versus sacrifice, because it's a very different connotation of what this is saying versus what you are saying.
And I think Keith Reisker was trying to make kind of the same point as the goal, the objective may be to kind of evaluate these opportunities for multimodal. The practical application then comes down to always money. What is it the city can afford to implement over time? The goal's good, but obviously then the resources become a piece of that conversation. And that's why looking 20 years is important, but we're gonna come back and talk in terms of 5 years. How are you gonna implement the next 5 years? After that, we'll have another 5 years, and so on.
Peggy and then Karina.
Yeah, I'd encourage us not to have a 20-year plan. Maybe it'll last 40 years, I don't know. But I think reviewing it rigorously in 10 years, just reviewing it at least to see.
Plan.
That is the plan. And I think all of council certainly has heard me that I have been advocating for the adoption of these two plans, and every 5 to 6 years, actually formally reviewing them in detail to make sure they meet the mark. And as we've talked about transportation here, all the innovation that's going on.
So indeed, in one sense, it's a living.
Oh, absolutely, it has to be.
Yeah, but I mean emphasizing that because some people are actually watching this, so.
Well, and you have to call it a 20-year plan, or we've been calling it 2040, because none of this, we can talk about it and plan it right now, but it's 10 to 15 years before some of this stuff rolls out. So while we continue to review the plan, it's long-term planning. Carol, or no, Karina first. Yes, you first.
I think the sentence is wrong. Page 43, under transit, it says sometimes, the last paragraph under the sacrifice section, I think the last sentence, sometimes this will mean that buses make stops within the travel lane to increase speeds?
Increase their speeds.
Increase their speeds, but not the speed of that traveling lane. Maybe rewrite that? Okay.
Carol?
Is the word sacrifice going to be changed?
Yes.
Trade-offs.
Okay, to trade-offs?
We're somewhere in that trade-off evaluate, so we'll come back to you with them.
Don't sacrifice that word.
Thank you, is there multiple
You
times?
gotta keep going.
Okay, so now we're on page 56. I think one sort of difference between the comprehensive plan and transportation master plan is that you're looking at those same 5 goals and how those are addressed in each of these modes. So I would suggest that we dig right in at the policy level. And if there's discussion around the goals, how do we wanna accommodate that? I can just ask the question with each of these sections.
What page
If there are
are
any questions relative to those goals, they are always the same 5. And then, speak to why that goal gets delivered through this mode.
Okay.
So are there any questions on the goals relative to auto and freight?
Karina?
What was clear to me in reading these goals, in particular sustainable, was that we are not building capacity through bigger roads. We're building.
exactly what
Wow. I'm loving, whatever, however you do that. That was my takeaway, that was the intended takeaway.
Stars are all
Alright, could you say?
Right, we understood each other, so everybody else just forget about it.
So you're basically saying that your interpretation was that we're not gonna expand the network, is that correct?
Correct. Not through building bigger roads, we're expanding capacity through operational efficiency.
Right.
That's the
Yeah,
right
it's
takeaway.
spending money at the nodes and not the links, for example. Intersections versus getting to an intersection.
Bruce?
I guess maybe just something a little more disjointed. The first sentence is sustainable, under goals, says flat out, the auto and freight networks in the city are already mostly built and generally require only maintenance operations. The first policy says focus on developing safe auto and freight networks. those two don't work, I don't think. I think you gotta change the policy to reflect that what you suggested in sustainable is they're already built and better focus on maintaining them for optimal efficiency or however you want to phrase it.
Yeah, so I'll just talk a little bit about the policy here, focus on developing safe and auto and freight networks. I think we can all agree that, you know, that there are steps that can be taken to make our auto and freight networks safer.
Are you suggesting the word develop means build new?
I mean, yeah, maybe that's the issue.
Enhancing or improving.
Sure.
Might go along that line, enhancing.
Is there other discussion on that first policy, focus on developing safe auto and freight networks? To advance regional partnerships to build consensus and leverage funding towards significant transportation projects. Yeah. So I'm on page 57.
Under policies.
Provide automobile level of service E or better on suburban connectors and commercial corridors, and level of service D or better on all other streets.
Robin?
So, in the conversation that I'd had with Mark a little earlier, I guess some communities actually get into more than, you know, just the connectors and corridors, but on down through all the different types of street. Would that behoove us to do that so that each street is treated as individual as opposed to generality better on all other streets?
That's certainly doable, but at the end of the day, basically what we're saying is all the other streets are gonna be C or above. And there's D or above. So basically, what you're saying is, yeah, we're gonna tackle them all, they're gonna be above this. I'm not sure that we wanna say, you know, local streets need to be A, cause that sets a super high benchmark. So that's a flexibility. The other part here is in Littleton, when we talk about context and making this plan reflective of Littleton, you know, to go from a C to an A on a lot of these streets is gonna require right of way, for example. And that's just something we're not in a financial position to tackle, except we're trying to say improve connectivity at an intersection or something. So it's certainly doable, but at the end of the day, you know, you gotta be flexibility. The other thing is, as a person who implements traffic calming, if we say put A on all local streets, I'm gonna have even more gray hair.
Smart.
Just maybe adding a little context to the conversation Robin and I had. Just this particular policy here, the level of service E or better, suburban connectors, commercial corridors, and D or better on the balance. Personally, I believe this is the right level of service for this moment in time for this TMP. I think over time, this is a good example of a policy that could be evaluated where you may have other corridors where you want to slice this thinner or more specifically. And I've been in communities where they've done that. But for us, since we've never had one, I think that this is generally a good place to start. And then as we collect information over time, again, Transportation Mobility Board, it's a great place to kind of evaluate how is the TMP performing.
Or provide auto and freight network projects that lead to operational and safety improvements. Prioritize the safety of vulnerable user groups on streets and trails. Support connections to employment, retail, and entertainment, recreation, land uses given the opportunity.
Just given the opportunity out. Karina?
I'm sorry, can I go back to 5? Prioritize, so here's my concern is with the word prioritize, because what that sounds like is for the vulnerable user groups, if that is a minority, we're prioritizing for a minority as opposed to the majority.
What's ADA?
Huh?
What's ADA?
What is what?
ADA, what's ADA?
I would assume it's minority, is that a?
Vulnerable user groups are typically defined as young or old, or you know, someone who has trouble getting around, pedestrians, bicyclists,
Mobility
city attorney would
limitations
like
are
to,
unprotected.
edit this.
I was just going to say enhance instead of prioritize.
Oh, yes.
Okay, enhance.
I'd be more comfortable with that.
I would
And it's not saying that the majority can't take advantage of
But when you prioritize, you're making a choice to do one thing because you can't maybe afford to do another. And I don't know that we would always take that position everywhere. Again, this is that concern of the word all as well. So I like enhance.
Okay,
Some other
let's keep going.
A second thing. And then was there, I heard an interest in removing given the opportunity. Is there any other comments
I think
on
it's a good word,
6?
because a lot of times when you say you shall or you must, this is more nebulous. Given the opportunity, if you can, I like it.
From what Keith has said, it's all if you can.
Hey, let's put it this way, opportunity is sometimes defined based on the grant that we may acquire. A perfect example of this is the work that's going on Platte Canyon. A lot of that work in that neighborhood is driven by grant money. In fact, we're paying nothing. So yes, opportunity is sometimes seized when you can get it. So.
What kind of opportunity?
Okay, number 7.
Develop street design and construction standards that prioritize safety and mobility, not speed.
Robin?
It seems kind of strange to add the not speed when you're already saying that you're going to prioritize safety and mobility. I mean, you're saying we're going to prioritize these things. Do you really need that not speed? Because this is what your priority is. You're stating it. You said, here's my priority, safety and mobility. Doesn't seem like you need to say not speed.
I think it's important to
You
say.
do need to say it because, speed has been built into the traffic network for 50 years and we've been prioritizing the automobile over the pedestrian and cyclist. And I love that this one ties back into, we're not gonna call it a sacrifice, it's a trade-off. Earlier, when we talked about how some of the things that may improve the situation for someone trying to walk down a sidewalk in a walker or wheelchair may actually impinge on the parking lane because you have to make that sidewalk wider to meet ADA. So I really appreciate that it sets up a very good contrast.
Yeah, I think when we build the streets, we have, we set the speed limit at 30, but the street's built for 45, cars are gonna go 45. So I think that's where that design for safety and not speed is really important.
City attorney has another suggestion. No, this is a good one.
Perhaps instead of not speed, over speed.
I was gonna say.
Oh,
That's good.
there.
That's
See,
very
you
good.
get credit. Okay, 8. It's 2. Get a asterisk tonight.
Okay. Develop a transportation demand management policy as a tool to help reduce congestion.
Karina and then Mark.
I don't like having a policy within a policy. So my recommendation is to adopt the transportation demand management tool to help reduce congestion.
Or plan.
Fine. I just don't like a policy within a
It's
policy.
called vision.
No, we-
David.
We need to use a more concrete term than that so we can chase money. I'll be honest with you about that. So.
Mark?
Oh, I tried to find out what demand management policy means. It's not in the definition. It used to be in the definitions. I mean, is that the proverbial, you mentioned putting a gate on northbound Santa Fe at 6 o'clock in the morning?
It's a set of programs or initiatives or incentives that would, help people use transit who can't afford it, or those kinds of things.
Or here's a perfect example, and you see this, for example, this is built into the North I-25 environmental impact study, going north of Denver all the way to Fort Collins. The TDM plan has programs to encourage people, for example, to carpool. So to provide incentives to do that, or to get less single occupancy vehicles to mitigate congestion. That kind of thing is.
So you'll define it?
Yes.
Sure.
Some communities, you go by the last number in your license plate, you can't drive at certain times. I know that's a fact in Europe. Some
We're not
places.
gonna try.
I know, you're not doing that.
I know that.
I know you want to. Let me slip in a couple other definitions you need. Access management, I need a definition of that. Also congestion management, what does that mean? So those are not in the,
Last
so
three.
those three,
Yeah.
thank you.
All right, maintain and periodically update the truck route map.
You can all look that up on the web if you're not sure where it is.
I know right where it is.
And how often is it gonna change?
Okay, so then,
One question, I wonder if we considered adding a Vision Zero policy here. Have you guys considered that at all?
We, as a staff, from a professional standpoint, those of you not familiar with this, Vision Zero is the effort to dramatically reduce the number of individuals that are killed in our transportation network. Period.
Denver has.
Whether it's cars, whether it's bike, whether it's peds, whatever. And a lot of cities have adopted that as a strategy. The state's gonna go there, we know several cities in Colorado already have. It's a framework to constantly focus on safety in a way, to make sure that you're reducing opportunities for people to end up in a bad place, whether it doesn't matter what mode it is. So we've talked about it as a staff. That's something that's frankly up to this group here.
Approaches it from an ethical standpoint.
I like that suggestion, I mean, basically, if you're talking about sacrifice, how many people are we willing to sacrifice for the network? What is 20 deaths a year okay? Is 50 or?
Zero. Let's do it.
So, just a couple things.
There's always trade-offs.
For us to think about before we just launch into it. So Vision Zero, definitely a great aspiration. Something that I think any of us would be proud to achieve. Definitely comes with trade-offs. To really achieve a zero death network would probably require some cultural, societal changes to the way we move around. Some pretty big steps to get there. Which is not to say that it's unattainable. Several countries, in fact, are getting close. But those countries are a lot different than ours. And we move a lot faster on our streets than they do.
Will that change a little bit service rating?
It may not change the level of service rating, but it would definitely change the design of our streets and the way we enforce our laws. So, if this body wants to go for that, then it's a pretty big commitment to making some big steps.
From the sounds of this, we need to do some more research before, as an individual, we say yay or nay, because what you're talking about, we need to understand. So we're making a commitment to our community, and, to make a commitment for the community, we better know what we're doing.
And by the way, I'm coming off as if I'm arguing against it. I'm really not. I just want you to understand the implications of that.
I would suggest, as prior to even your comment, Robin, is this is the kind of thing that's Vision Zero is at an evolutionary stage still. We've only been really wrapping our arms around this the last, less than a decade. This is the kind of thing that I think, council could kind of give some direction to the Transportation and Mobility Board to kind of engage on this over time. And, maybe next time when we do, by the time we get to our 5-year iteration of this, we're gonna be talking about, how do we deal with some different things? What have we seen in the auto world and the pedestrian world? And so to me, this is something that maybe not in this document, but we pass it along to the TMB to take a crack at over the next few years. Because that's what we got that body for now.
And
Sounds good.
And I would say that maybe it's in this document,
You got
not necessarily as a policy, but as a future plan to consider or something like that. Because I definitely don't want it to drop out, because I love that you guys are into it. So I think we should add it as a plan to consider.
all right, now we're on to page 79.
Do we need the word maintain if we periodically update?
Plan?
Maintain and periodically update truck route. And numbers.
Yeah, we have one. So,
But why do we need maintain? If we're periodically updating it, we do maintain it.
Yeah, you guys figure
That's
that
fine,
out.
we'll figure that one out. I agree, I understand what you're saying, Peggy, appreciate it.
Alright, so again,
79.
those 5 goals relative to active transportation. Are there any questions?
What's he doing?
What page was that, I'm sorry?
Page 79.
Yes, ma'am.
It jumped to 70.
Enters into active transportation, and again, those 5 goals are outlined on page 79.
Any- Robin?
It's kind of a repeat, but it's just like what you were saying before, Corinne, about the all ages, all abilities, all backgrounds, just, you know, if you've got, what have we got, 48,000 people, you can't do this, you can't do everything for 48,000 people, that's all.
Okay.
Alright, digging in on the policies beginning on page 80. First appearing on page 81. Relative to planning, develop a complete networks policy.
Policy within policy.
Do we know what a complete network policy is? Is that defined?
It's defined in the earlier section where level of service is discussed. So in the missions and goals chapter.
Maybe anything that's capitalized should be in a definition, just to be able to easily find it.
Glossary.
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks. And I think if there's a way to keep that in there, because we do need to develop that policy, but put it in another place, because I agree with Karina, you can't make a policy to make a policy. Well, you can, but it's silly, that's just silly.
Right, next, develop a transportation demand management
Plan.
Okay. And again, that'll be defined. Implement a comprehensive bicycle and pedestrian count program similar to the vehicle count program. Consider permanent installations.
Why?
Why?
What are they?
Vehicle and pedestrian, okay, so
No, so this one's for, so I know, understand the vehicle one, we do that now, but bicycle and pedestrian count?
For the same reasons you count
Yeah.
cars.
Yeah,
You
so-
wanna identify where your needs are, how many people you need to accommodate, all of those things.
we do ped counts, for example, when we're putting in a rapid flashing beacon. We have to do ped counts there, we do those things, and so it's a way for us to, we do them around schools. It's just historically, Littleton's never really had a formalized program. So it's one of those things, it's like we work with South Suburban now to do counts on Mary Carter in a different way, and improve. So we count Aaron every day twice on Mary Carter going to and from work. For example, we can't rely on him just out there with a clicker all day, but so.
Say, consider permanent installations, could you add 5 or 6 more words? What kind of installation? For example?
Sure.
Just
It's
we'll
gonna
be careful,
dangle.
we'll put those trail cams out there, Mark, to be able to
Sure.
pick out the deer wandering through town.
Sally, racing team wannabes, okay, slow them down. Yeah.
Consider installing an all ages and abilities bicycle facility for every new bicycle project.
I don't really know what that
I don't
means.
know what that is.
So all ages and abilities means that someone who's 8 years old on his bike, his or her bike, by himself, his or herself, got something down, is able to use that facility safely, comfortably, conveniently.
What's a facility?
What's a facility?
Facility.
That is a bike lane or a path or a trail, any kind of bicycle.
Or say that and not say facility?
Facility sounds like a building.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was thinking like almost like what the bus stop facilities are.
In standard industry definition, but we can find something else.
Not for us.
We get it.
Dumb it down.
Now we're enhancing it.
There you go.
Update city code to address burgeoning micro-mobility industry, include operating rules such as number of permits, speed limits, whether users should use sidewalks, bike lanes, or general purpose lanes, depending on speeds, and establish restricted areas.
That's definitely new.
I love it when you like it.
Yeah.
And I hear it.
Nobody say the S word. I heard somebody say it. Stop it.
Skateboard.
So relative to maintenance, consider including bicycle and pedestrian facility upgrades as part of every infrastructure project, including resurfacing projects.
Yes.
Sub-bullet, develop a resurfacing checklist that considers bicycle facilities and referenced by a link.
Agreed.
Yeah, Federal Highway Administration's recommendations.
To include bicycle and pedestrian detection for signal actuation in every new traffic signal installation.
Oh my God, yeah. Otherwise you gotta go on the sidewalk and hit the little pedestrian thing every time, and you're supposed to be the same as a car.
Should that be consider though, as
Yeah,
opposed to
yeah,
like
consider.
using consider for everything?
This may be decided by us because the last two legislative sessions, I've had to provide advice on this to the state legislature on, they wanted to start this with motorcycles. And motorcycles, if they thought the signal wasn't working, could just go. And of course, that expanded into bikes, so we may have rules on this on our own shortly. That we
Sorry,
don't control.
I don't understand what this says. Can someone dumb it down for me and tell me what a signal actuation?
It's because bikes don't, if you're just a bike at a stoplight, it doesn't, and the bike is, and the signal is controlled by, what do you call it?
Sensor.
So it won't trigger the lights, you just sit there forever. Or you have to go and hit the pedestrian button, and some don't have pedestrian buttons.
This is a spot where technology is helpful because we have lots of loops, but if you drive around a lot of our several intersections in our community, not a lot, you'll see mounted cameras up there on the span arm. That's a detection device like a loop. Picks up a visual image and makes a decision. We're not streaming that all on the internet, so not everybody, just to put that out there publicly, so.
But I think that this is a valuable one to have, and I don't think it's something that we're gonna do tomorrow or maybe even next year. But
For the children.
it's the right turns that are the most, cars turning right are the most dangerous to cyclists. So there's a movement in the cycling community that cyclists, as quick as they can clear an intersection, it's much safer for them. I just saw that happen on Prince when I was driving in. And it is safer, but there's a whole lot of work that has to go into it with cities. Keith and I met with some folks a while back, where, Bicycle Colorado, I think it was, where this is something that they are supporting, but it hasn't been widely implemented, and I think it will trickle through. So this is something I would say we keep it as a point of planning for us, but don't jump out the gate.
Yeah, this is a place where every time we do signal upgrades or those kind of things, we're gonna look at something like this. It's just part of how we tackle everything going through an intersection at the time.
Makes sense.
Okay.
Maintain a fleet of smaller snow removal vehicles to plow trails, shared use paths, and protected bike lanes.
We already got that.
So I think what we're trying to maintain is clear paths and trails. One of the ways we do that is to have snow removal, small snow removal vehicles. So
It's just the order of the words. Is that right?
That's another one, crazy people do.
well, I'm just saying it's the policy of transportation maintenance, the transportation plan is the main.
bike paths.
Not
Okay, Kathleen fixed that.
they got it.
Thank you. All right, next.
Update city code to require residents, businesses to clear sidewalks within 24 hours. Existing code states within a reasonable time after every snowfall.
Like it.
Relative to development, in development proposals, limit curb cuts along proposed planned bicycle and pedestrian routes.
I like that.
Require maintaining clear sidewalks or bicycle lanes during building or street construction or provide a detour. There's an example referenced with a hyperlink. 3, encourage new developments to provide high-quality parking and other end-of-trip facilities for bicyclists.
What does high quality parking mean? How do you define high quality?
Like garages,
So one
like they have at
high
RTD.
quality example would be a shed, a bike shed, where it's covered.
RTD has
protected
those.
from the elements,
Bike
or you can have the
lockers.
bike lockers.
As
Those
opposed
kinds
to
of
the
things.
hanging on the rack like we have at the downtown station now.
Can I go back real quick to maintenance? We don't talk about the sidewalks and the sidewalk program. Is there a place, is that not?
Well, let's
Because
put, here's what I'll suggest.
residents are responsible for their sidewalks. That's a maintenance thing. Is that anything we would address here?
I would suggest that we consider putting a statement in there about having a new sidewalk policy. Because at the staff level, we're evaluating alternatives to that right now. Because we haven't updated our policy, as far as I can tell, in at least 25 years. So.
Okay, so
In our
update city code.
Yeah.
Okay, figure out how to fit that in there somewhere.
Figure something out, yeah.
Okay.
And then we're back to number 4 in development, encourage development to utilize grid street networks and limit the use of cul-de-sacs.
I put pom-poms on for that. That's not just for traffic, that's snow plowing and paving and everything, you name it.
So that's going forward, not retroactive.
No.
Correct.
So now we're moving to page 94. So again, you'll see those same 5 goals, they stretch across pages 94 and 95. These are all relative to transit.
On page 83.
So Peggy has a question on page 83.
Yeah, I'm looking at the protected bike lane cycle plan. How easy is it to plow those?
To plow them,
Yeah.
you need typically you would need a smaller vehicle.
When you have a fleet of mini plows,
Yes.
Yeah.
they're really small plows, they're like, to go to your comment earlier. You know, we like all the ones like South Suburban and the bridges, we do this with like basically a lot of times it's like an ATV mount on a piece of equipment.
Because there are some pretty darn dedicated cyclists.
Aaron's out there with his shovel on the snowy days working very hard.
Pushing it in front of his.
Especially those fat tire bikes now. Yes. Do you have one of those fat tire bikes?
All right, so are we moving to policies on page 96?
Yes.
May, relative to transit, advocate for maintenance and enhancement of existing RTD bus and rail service in Littleton.
Did you advocate for insist on maintenance?
Improve ADA connections and trip planning services connecting to fixed route transit network.
Yes.
Pursue regional partnerships with neighboring municipalities to fund high-capacity transit improvements, including light rail and BRT.
Amen.
I wouldn't. I think I think I'd add, private partnerships also. Regional. And
Prioritize the safety of vulnerable user groups on trains, buses, and at stations.
Why is that hours to own?
I'll give you an example. I saw this several hours ago now. I was driving northbound on Santa Fe after having exited 470. And on the southbound side of the road outside of Woolhurst, there's a bus stop that sits on a shoulder at 45 miles an hour, and there was a woman and a child in a stroller there today. And so when we work on building a road, we should tackle some of those things along the way in partnership with them.
The word that's throwing me off is it says on the train, on the bus. Oh, and then at the station. So in your example, it's at the station?
Well, and
using trains, buses. Okay, there's that one. Peggy, did you have something?
yeah, so if you're saying at stations, just a stop is not a station, so maybe stations and stops.
Okay, good. Good next.
Support connections to employment, retail, and entertainment recreation opportunities.
Can we say demand instead of support? How do we make this stronger? That's our biggest challenge is they're not connected. We don't have a transit system that's fully connected. We have, thank God, and what an opportunity that we have the light rail, but then we don't have the connections to the buses, and the buses that run through town don't go where they need to run. And so I'm looking for words stronger than support, that this is.
I think, I'll make a suggestion here. I think demand and support. Because in my experience, we can demand all we want, but eventually we have to bring our own stuff to the table.
And this is under the active transportation, so it's the bike and walking and.
Transit, sorry, that header is.
It's a bad header.
Never mind.
I like that. I like that, Keith.
I was just looking up to see what.
Easy change to make, thanks for catching that. Alright, and develop a transportation demand management plan to reduce, say it all together, to reduce congestion. Alright, then we are on, oh, yes.
Sorry, just wondering if there's anything related to like parking and services available at the light rail stations. It might be policy worthy or if that's covered elsewhere.
Parking and services meaning?
Well, okay, yeah, I think we touch on like connectivity to them, but I'm thinking parking is definitely an issue at our stations right now.
I think it's worth adding. I think also if there's a way to talk about improving that parking, i.e. a garage, and also the fact that we do have that basically crusher fine lot at Mineral, that needs to be dealt with. So how do you?
I would suggest something like, policy to seek whatever the words, to improve access to transit facilities in general, including, I don't want to be so specific to talk about parking at light rail stations. I don't think just throw an idea out.
Well, we could just make it a separate one. It doesn't have to be World of Transit. It could be. It's huge. I mean, and again, that would be one of those things we could get that in here and share it with RTD and say, this is.
and you may find some of that conversation in the trends.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind, and if you're not seeing it there as well, then we can take a stab at that based on.
And many places as we can have it, I think.
Piece that really kind of captured.
I think it was during the Mineral Station framework planning and community outreach that we had heard a lot about actual facilities like bathrooms or shelter at the Mineral Station for inclement weather or what, especially if we start thinking about because Mineral Station is an end of line. So I don't see that anywhere here. And Did you hear that again coming out of the community or reviewing any of the documents?
I remember that from the framework.
Yeah.
I don't know that we heard our request for bathrooms and those kinds of facilities.
Maybe I might suggest that that's something that the specificity of those, we say that we're looking to improve and enhance facilities in and around transit operations, and we push the detail of that to the
That's
implementation.
fine, I'm fine.
Something like that.
Okay.
All right, so then that takes us to page 102, 102. So again, you'll see those same 5 goals.
Bingo. 02. You said 102. Bingo. No?
What time of night is it now?
It's our signal to quit.
So these are relative to mobility trends. Policies, numbering issues there. Yeah, we're starting with 3, but it's really 1. Okay, that first one is coordinate traffic management center systems and operations with adjacent municipalities and CDOT.
Traffic management center systems, what is that?
That is where you can actively manage signals or the dynamic messaging signs, so you look at all your cameras that you have around your system, can actively manage emergency response, those kinds of things. So it's a staffed facility that dispatches various.
I would just, maybe to make it ride smoother, we might do something like coordinate traffic management center technology and operations with adjacent, something like that.
It still needs definition, so another one for the glossary.
Okay.
Do you capitalize this one? Like, is this a thing? Is it a?
It is a thing, so we should capitalize it.
Okay.
TOC.
Mark, your wife would be proud of me.
Partner with neighboring municipalities and the private sector as needed to manage the introduction of new technologies to Littleton. Transition government fleets to electric and other zero-emission vehicles.
Yes.
This goes back to the conversation that Keith, you were having earlier, Keith, Public Works Keith, about not getting specific and leaving open the flexibility because, again, the new studies are showing that using electric cars from their whole lifespan is just as polluting as diesels. And I don't think that's really the route that we're trying to go with this.
Natural gas and hydrogen.
Yes, but this is getting specific to electric.
And zero emission.
Right, so maybe we can get rid of part of the electric, but again, what Keith was saying earlier was leaving it more open.
So just say zero emission.
Why don't we just go with, alternative fuel.
There you go.
Yeah.
Good.
French fry oil.
They smell good though.
Back to the future.
Capacitors. We do not have a DeLorean in the shop right now, sorry. What'd you do with it?
What do our vehicle and what type of vehicles we use have to do with mobility? Like, this feels like a capital plan, not a mobility.
Sure, I'll answer that one. As a community, we can make a decision as to, so for example, investing in electric charging stations at, say, along major corridors. We've done that here. Actually, it's over there. It's that direction. And so it's part of supporting the changes in the technology that's occurring today. For example, why people don't drive electric cars from here to, say, Vail. Because there's not supporting infrastructure along the way.
But that was one of the things that Craig brought up in an earlier section that we said we have to include it over there, which makes sense to me. But again, this is kind of my same comment of, it's not about the small plows that you're gonna maintain, it's about maintaining a snow-free path. So here, I just don't, this is not that we shouldn't do this, it's not a mobility policy to me.
Well, it may not be something we would do this year or next year, but maybe it's something that stays over time as things, it becomes more natural for us to do that. It's
Yeah, just kind of, when you think about a transportation master plan, it's beyond mobility, so air quality is definitely a piece of a typical plan, certainly on the front range. So zero emission or alternative fuels tends to be part of the conversation about air quality.
I see that connection, and that's what I'm saying, I think this, I'm not saying we shouldn't, I just, it doesn't feel like it fits right here.
I guess that comes down to, the question of, from a transportation perspective, do we as a community wanna be a leader in looking towards alternative technologies? That's really the question. So.
I support it, I just don't think it's the right place to follow.
Well, I think we last time we bought an omnibus or the shopping cart, we bought one intentionally that was a low or zero emissions.
I did buy an electric vehicle. You see it driving around Western Welcome in a new golf cart. I did buy that in the last 4 or 5 months, so.
Great.
At least one electric vehicle we added to the fleet.
Since these technologies are evolving and this is a long-term plan, I wonder if we should have a policy to continuously evaluate new technologies such as.
I like that idea.
Yeah,
I think that's good.
Okay, be transparent about prioritization and implementation of capital improvements.
Fix that transparent.
Okay,
Kyle?
I would like to see something in here about partnering with or considering with the mobility hub studies that RTD and CDOT are working on.
Yeah, we could do something along the lines of be an active participant or role player in regional transportation initiatives and planning.
That's a good one.
so that takes us to page 113. And that's that sneak peek at critical corridors. You wanna,
So you think yours printed small?
I like yours because mine are all blank once I get to 109.
this really,
Okay, so this really is just a sneak peek, and I don't know that we want to spend a lot of time on this tonight, especially given the hour here. But it is going to summarize our strategies that relate to each of these corridors. And maybe we just can kind of, at a high level, go over what we're talking about on, say, Santa Fe. Thank you.
it's not much better.
No, it is. So,
It isn't.
in response to our agreed upon policy that we will focus on operational improvements and safety improvements, we have identified a number of near-term operational improvement projects that don't involve grade separating any of the major intersections or widening Santa Fe to a great extent. So those are at the major bottlenecks along the corridor, Mineral, Portals, Prince. And then there is this pursue grade separated interchange at Mineral Avenue. So it's pursue, it's not implement necessarily. Then, obviously a critical piece of the Santa Fe corridor is its relation to downtown and the congestion that occurs at Bowles. So perhaps there's a way to improve that through other connections. Obviously, it'll be a big part of the downtown mobility and land use plan. Big barrier between downtown and the river. So those are the kinds of things, without getting into the details, that'll be identified on our critical corridors.
And so you have those kind of outlined, but I will say that, they're a direct influence on the implementation plan that we'll bring to you in September. So like spending a little bit of time with those to kind of see how the things that we've talked about tonight, what those look like in terms of projects, but that implementation plan, you know, when you start to dig in on that, it does try to get us to a point where there is a scoring and a ranking that kind of give us the clues of how the Transportation Mobility Board will help you think through those prioritizations in future years and when you start to affect in a shorter term. So I would just spend a little extra time with those in advance of that September meeting. There'll also be additional information, again, the fiscal impact analysis. So we'll show you what we see with Tischler Bice's work, but we won't crystallize or finalize that without your input. And so that will be very much a discussion piece. Same goes for the implementation plan. Again, I can't overemphasize the fact that these are drafts. They have been a product of listening out in the community and trying to capture that conversation through the notes we've taken all along the way. They do remain draft until September 16th at 5 p.m. when public comment closes.
5 p.m.
5 p.m. on the dot.
It pays to be specific.
Very good.
We are right there with you.
So that, then what you would expect to see as part of that September conversation are those two pieces, the fiscal impact and then the implementation plan. Then after that public comment closes, we'll be back in front of you October 8th. So you would expect to see that sort of, or you would see that document just days before in your packet. And we'll try and spend our time during that meeting really showing you where both that combination of public comment, your input, and how we've modified both of the plans. Yes?
When is this going in front of the Transportation Mobility Board at the same level of detail that we've gone through just now?
Yes, we have two of them here, and yeah, we've scheduled a special session just for that with the board. In fact, they're completing an online survey related to the draft right now in preparation for that, so that we can consolidate thought before we move in to that, so we can really be as effective as possible.
And again, we're encouraging that and all of our boards and commissions to take a look at these plans, find where those points of consensus are. Obviously, if there are things that you like, we'd love to hear that too. And then consolidate that into a memo directly from the body. I think there are members of those boards and commissions that may also offer individual comments, but we're kind of walking the Transportation Mobility Board through that process with a survey that includes an opportunity to kind of get a temperature read on like, it's pretty close, needs a little more refinement, and then drill down to those comment levels. So I think it'll be a really productive way for them to go through the draft plan.
Robin?
So you were saying, don't make comments on these now, but we're gonna do that next, at the next meeting? You know, the quarter.
September.
I think that'll be, because I think
I
what
do
you'll
have some questions on it, but I can wait.
Yeah, and I think what you'll see in the implementation plan, I think will shed a lot more light, just in terms of that ranking, scoring, and process, so that you kind of, you know, it's getting to that clarity. And hopefully what we're proposing to you feels like a very intuitive and sort of simple process, so that if you read this plan, you'd know exactly kind of where those priorities lie if the dollars were available, because that is the biggest piece.
And just something in one of them that is very contrary to what we had talked about in Planning Commission, and that's why I was just curious about making those types of comments, but that's fine to make those later.
And I'll also just point out that these will look different, that we've been refining projects as we go as part of this conversation, so this was a draft and these will be different.
Yeah, and do you expect that we'll see different overlay maps as well as part of that implementation?
Yes.
Okay.
A few changes to those.
Okay, because that, you know, that's how we've been sort of refining that and going through that process of,
Yep.
you know, you pull out the map and it's like, okay, so why is that line there and how far would it actually go?
We had a
So,
comment from Karina tonight just about that.
yeah.
Just as a wrap up from the Public Works Director, tonight's meeting is a major milestone for us as a community. And, obviously I mentioned that at the start, getting ready to go to the transportation board, so I appreciate that. And why is this important? Where does this really hit it? We had our kickoff meeting, staff-wise, for the first meeting for the Planning and Environmental Linkages Study on Santa Fe. And this, for example, what you see in that critical corridor up there, that is a tool for us to enunciate as we go through this process to the other communities and to CDOT what's important to us as Littleton about the future of Santa Fe. And that's why, this is the kind of thing where we're doing a lot of work, we're spending a lot of time, but that's where it really starts to step out for us. And the timing's just kind of really, just kind of right at that nexus. So we appreciate that as a staff because it's going to put us in a very different place than we've ever been as a community before.
I'm glad you mentioned that. If you walk in with a one-page summary of Santa Fe, as it's written now, you'll be laughed out of the room. This needs to be a lot more powerful, a lot more forceful, a lot more direct.
Yeah, this is just.
We're not gonna get anywhere.
No, when I look at a corridor item like this, if you think about it, the vast majority of people that pick up this plan or come to our website are not gonna do what you just did tonight. They're gonna look at the pictures, that sounds really bad, but that's what we're gonna head to for something like this. It's reality. So, this is just a way for us, everything that's in this plan is what defines the importance and the community character that we need to express as we go forward in that process. And this entire document informs that and really helps us do just what you did, which is say this is exactly what we want, where we wanna go, and let's be partners with you to create success. I wanted to say thank you for all your work and.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good work, great work, actually.
Yeah, once again, we have never had a transportation master plan, so we have nothing to judge this against, so. But it is very, very thorough. I don't think you left any stone unturned. We can parse words all day long, but at the end of the day, you guys really did end up producing something that I think the greatest benefit of it is that it now says that Littleton is intentional. We are telling you what we want, we are telling you what we will support and why. And it's coming from the ground up, it's coming from the citizens. That's where all this information came. We saw it we talked about it for the first time tonight. And that I think is what will be the greatest support for anything that happens in this community going forward, is that now there is a roadmap, there is a comp plan, there's no surprises, you don't have to guess what we want, you don't have to look at 1982 and try to figure out how to make that look like 1994. But we are living with a lot of really bad development, we're living with some really bad, poorly designed streets. We're living with a lot of neighborhoods that are struggling with not having sidewalks. We are in a mess with ADA. But that was yesterday. So I feel like today we have just made, and also from last week, we're not there anymore. We're not talking about doing this, we're doing it. So, and thank you to the Planning Commission for, see, I'm slow, but I get it. For all the work you guys have put in. You guys have spent a lot of time looking at this, talking about this. Everybody in this room, it's clear, has read these huge documents, have thought about it, came prepared to have these conversations with you guys. And so to council and to planning and to staff, we don't even know how many hours have gone into this, but I think it's paying off, and to the community for all the, and we're not done. So, but I'll tell you, the work that's been done so far is just amazing, and I think we can all be really, really proud of that, and proud of ourselves too. So, okay, we've got, when is our next? You said it earlier. Our next planning.
Our next joint leadership meeting is September 10th.
September 10th. So less than a month. We'll see everybody here again.
And then just a quick reminder, the telephone town hall is scheduled for August 28th. If you do know of people, or even you yourselves want to listen in on that conversation, you register at littletontownhall.org. And the information is both on the envisionlittleton.org website as well as the city's website. And then September 12th, Peter Kajiyama, the last of our speaker series, which I think will be a great opportunity for all of us to celebrate a lot of this great community dialogue.
Yeah, excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, we're adjourned.
Keith, the game should be getting out right by now, so you should be. About 2 minutes.